Welcome, dear friends, to a tale of promise, betrayal, and the unexpected rescue of a family. Enjoy the story. The sprawling Wilson mansion in Connecticut's affluent Greenwich neighborhood had never known silence until now. The marble floors that once echoed with children's laughter and family gatherings now amplified the hollow sounds of Rachel Wilson's heels as she wandered through vacant rooms. "They're only thinking of the business, Thomas," Rachel said softly, watching her husband stare out the window of their master suite. "Serbia isn't that far." Thomas Wilson, the renowned architect whose firm had shaped the city's skyline, didn't turn around. His broad shoulders, once proud and straight, seemed to cave inward. "I built this house for them, Rachel. Every corner, every detail. It was meant for our grandchildren to grow up in." Their son Michael's voice still rang in Rachel's ears from their last video call. "Dad, you've got to understand. The suppliers are all in Eastern Europe. We can run everything so much more efficiently from there. The weather's wonderful," their daughter Jennifer had chimed in. "You and Mom would love it here. It's time to retire anyway, Dad." But Thomas wouldn't hear of it. "My firm needs me," he'd insisted. 30 years of reputation doesn't run itself. Now, watching her husband's reflection in the window, Rachel saw the toll their children's departure had taken. The mansion, a 15,000-square-foot testament to Thomas's dreams of a multi-generational family home, felt like a museum of memories. "The Anderson project needs your approval," Rachel reminded him gently. "And the city council's waiting for the downtown renovation plans." "The house will stay in the family," Thomas said suddenly, turning to face her. His steel-gray eyes, so like Michael's, burned with intensity. "Promise me that, Rachel. No matter what happens, this house stays with our blood." Rachel crossed the room and took his hand. "Of course it will. Where else would the kids come home to?" But Thomas's grip tightened. "Promise me, explicitly." "I promise, Thomas. The house stays in the family." Neither of them knew then how that promise would be tested, or how the echoing halls of the Wilson mansion would soon fill with voices again, though not the ones they'd expected. The first heart attack came without warning, a cruel reminder that even the most carefully designed plans can crumble. The second, a year later, felt like a countdown starting. Rachel spent her days in the sterile hospital corridors, watching Thomas's vitality drain away beneath fluorescent lights. "I hate leaving so soon, Mom," Jennifer said, standing in the hospital corridor. Her husband, Mark, was already checking his phone for flight times. But the Belgrade office— "Your father understands," Rachel interrupted, though the lie tasted bitter. "Business is business. We'll be back soon," Jennifer promised. But they both knew it wasn't true. The Serbian venture was consuming all their time, transforming their family's modest construction supply business into an international enterprise. The hospital room had become Thomas's temporary domain, his architectural drawings replaced by heart monitors and 4 drips. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about blockages and procedures, but Rachel saw the shadow in their eyes. "Rachel." Thomas's voice was barely a whisper one night, his hand searching for hers in the dimness. "The house. We're not having this conversation," she said firmly. But he persisted. "Promise me again. Promise me you'll never sell it. Thomas, please." His fingers tightened around hers with surprising strength. "It's all I have left to give them." The promise fell from her lips like a sacred vow. "I'll never sell it, not while I live." When the end came, it was quiet, like Thomas himself had been in those final days. The funeral drew relatives from across the country, their sympathy thinly veiling their judgment. Rachel heard the whispers. The children couldn't even stay in the country, left their parents alone in that big house. All for money. Aunt Margaret's embrace was warm, her words to Rachel gentle. "You poor dear. To think Thomas built this magnificent house for the family and now—" But when Jennifer approached, the old woman merely nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. Michael, who had flown in from Belgrade with his wife Sarah, received similarly cold treatment. "They don't understand," Jennifer protested later, mascara streaking her cheeks. "We didn't abandon you and Dad. We were building something. Your father was proud of you," Rachel said, though the words felt hollow. "He understood. The wake lasted well into the evening, the mansion filled with voices for the first time in months. But they were the wrong voices, strangers speaking in hushed tones about Thomas's legacy, about the architectural firm's future, about Rachel's plans. That night, after everyone had gone and the children had left for their respective flights, Rachel walked through the empty house. Her footsteps echoed off marble floors and mahogany paneling. In the master bedroom, she touched Thomas's pillow, still holding the shape of his head. "I'll keep my promise," she whispered into the darkness. "But what am I supposed to do with all this emptiness?" The question echoed unanswered through the vacant halls. Outside, the carefully maintained gardens that Thomas had designed continued their cycle of bloom and fade, indifferent to the grief within the mansion's walls. Tomorrow, she would need to visit the architectural firm. There were projects to oversee, clients to reassure. But tonight, she allowed herself to be simply a widow, alone in a house built for a family that no longer existed as Thomas had imagined it. Life settled into a lonely routine in the Wilson mansion. Rachel kept only essential staff. Maria, the housekeeper who'd been with them for 15 years, and Steve, the security guard who doubled as a handyman. The architectural firm demanded little of her time. Thomas had trained his deputy well, and Rachel's role as manager was mostly ceremonial. "Mrs. Wilson, you really should get out more," Maria said one morning, watching Rachel pick at her solitary breakfast. "This house, it's too quiet." Rachel nodded absently, stirring her untouched coffee. "I think I'll walk to work today." These walks became her escape. Instead of returning to the empty mansion after work, she'd wander through Greenwich's manicured streets, window shopping or sitting in cafes, anything to delay going home. "You know what the worst part is, Maria?" Rachel confided one evening. "The silence. It's like the house is holding its breath, waiting for something." It was during one of her afternoon walks that she spotted the notice on a coffee shop bulletin board. "Female graduate student seeks room in quiet home with mature woman." Rachel stopped, coffee halfway to her lips. The mansion had 5 unused bedrooms. The idea took root before she could dismiss it. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Wilson?" Steve asked when she told him her plan. "Strangers in the house?" "Thomas wanted this place filled with young people," Rachel replied. "Just not quite like this." The first applicants arrived the next week. Katie and Beth, doctoral candidates in literature at Yale, stood in the grand foyer with wide eyes. "This is incredible," Katie breathed, taking in the sweeping staircase. "We were expecting a spare room, not Downton Abbey." "The room was my daughter's," Rachel explained, leading them upstairs. "I've had it renovated, added a private bathroom." Beth ran her hand along the mahogany banister. "And you're really only asking that much for rent?" "I'm not doing this for the money," Rachel said quietly. "This house needs voices again." The girls moved in the following weekend, bringing with them the chaos of youth textbooks scattered across the kitchen table, late-night discussions floating down the halls, the occasional burst of laughter. "They're good girls," Maria observed, watching them hurry off to classes. "But what will your children say?" Rachel straightened her shoulders. "It's my house now." But she hadn't counted on the phone call from Jennifer. "Roommates, Mom? Really?" Her daughter's voice crackled across the international line. "What would Dad think?" "Your father thought this house should be full of life," Rachel replied more sharply than she intended. "And now it is." The conversation ended awkwardly, but Rachel felt a strange liberation. For the first time since Thomas's death, she'd made a decision entirely her own. That evening, she joined the girls for tea in the kitchen. Listening to their enthusiastic chatter about dissertations and department politics, the familiar space felt different somehow. Warmer, more alive. Later, alone in her room, Rachel touched Thomas's empty pillow. "I'm keeping my promise," she whispered. "Just not quite the way you imagined." She couldn't have known then that these student renters were just the beginning. That fate had an even more unexpected tenant waiting in the wings. One who would test her promise to Thomas in ways she never could have anticipated. The autumn morning that Dr. Adam Lawrence first rang the doorbell, Rachel was reviewing blueprints in the study. Maria showed him in, and Rachel found herself facing a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a medical drama. tall, impeccably dressed, with dark eyes that held both intelligence and warmth. Dr. Lawrence, he introduced himself, his accent subtle but exotic. I understand you have a room available? Rachel found herself straightening her posture. Yes, my son's old room. Though I should mention there are already 2 female students. Perfect, he smiled. After sharing a house with 3 fellow residents, I need somewhere quiet to work on my doctorate. The hospital can be intense. The hospital? Greenwich General. I'm the new attending cardiologist in the cardiac surgery department. His eyes flickered to Thomas's photo on the desk. I understand your late husband. Yes, Rachel said quietly. Heart attack. Something in Adam's expression softened. I'm sorry. Perhaps it's inappropriate for me to stay here. No, Rachel surprised herself by saying. Actually, it feels right somehow. Adam moved in the following weekend, his possessions notably minimal. Medical books, a laptop, and precisely organized clothes. Unlike the girls' cheerful chaos, his presence was nearly invisible, save for the occasional scent of Turkish coffee drifting from the kitchen. He's very considerate, Maria observed one morning. And he fixed the kitchen faucet yesterday. Rachel nodded, trying to ignore how aware she was of his presence in the house. At 52, she told herself, she had no business noticing how his shirt sleeves rolled up revealed strong forearms, or how his smile seemed to light up the room. The first theater tickets appeared on her desk a month later. The symphony is in town, Adam said casually over breakfast. It would be a shame to waste the extra ticket. Dr. Lawrence, Adam, please. And before you say no, consider that I'm merely being practical. We live in the same house. We're both professionals. Why not enjoy some culture together? Rachel found herself accepting. And that evening, seated beside him in the darkened theater, she felt an almost forgotten flutter in her chest. You look lovely tonight, he murmured, and Rachel was grateful for the darkness hiding her blush. More invitations followed. Art galleries, jazz clubs, restaurant openings. Each time, Adam was the perfect gentleman, his attention making Rachel feel both protected and oddly young. Mom, is everything okay? Jennifer asked during their weekly call. Maria mentioned something about you going out a lot. I'm fine, Rachel said firmly. Just living a little. But late at night, she fought with her conscience. He's too young, she told her reflection. What would people think? Adam, however, seemed to anticipate her doubts. Age is just a number, he said one evening, presenting her with a bouquet of roses. What matters is how we feel, and how she felt was alive. More alive than she'd been since Thomas's death. When Adam finally kissed her in the garden, where Thomas had planted her favorite roses, Rachel found herself unable to pull away. Let me make you happy, he whispered against her hair. Let me bring life back to this house. Later, she would remember those words and wonder if she should have heard the note of possession in them. But at that moment, with stars above and Adam's arms around her, Rachel only felt the promise of a new beginning. The transformation happened so gradually that Rachel barely noticed at first. Small things? Adam suggesting a different arrangement of furniture, recommending a new security system, offering to manage the household expenses. His presence grew from occupying a single room to filling the entire mansion. The students are rather noisy, aren't they? He mentioned one evening over dinner. Their music disturbs my research. Katie and Beth? They're usually so considerate, Rachel frowned. Perhaps, Adam smiled, reaching for her hand. It's time to reconsider our living arrangements. After all, we're practically married. The words hung in the air between them. Rachel's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Married? Why not? Adam's dark eyes held hers. We're already living together. I love you. The house is certainly big enough. Maria found her later in the garden, sitting among Thomas's roses. Mrs. Wilson? She hesitated. Are you sure about this? He makes me happy, Maria. Isn't that enough? The wedding was small, civil. Jennifer and Michael couldn't make it, urgent business in Belgrade, but sent elaborate flowers. Adam wore an impeccably tailored suit. Rachel chose a cream-colored dress that made her feel both elegant and young. That evening, Adam brought up the students again. Darling, now that we're married, Shouldn't we have our privacy? I could use their room as a study. Rachel found herself agreeing, though something twisted in her stomach as she watched Katie and Beth pack their books and posters. We'll miss you, Mrs. Wilson. Katie hugged her. This place, it was like coming home. Adam's promotion to head of cardiology came next. We should celebrate, he announced. I'm taking you to my homeland. The 2-day trip was a whirlwind of luxury hotels and exclusive restaurants. Adam's colleagues treated him like royalty, and by extension, Rachel found herself wrapped in a cocoon of deference. Beautiful, isn't it? Adam gestured at the opulent surroundings. This could be our life. But something about the extravagance made Rachel uneasy. The marble and gold reminded her of museums, beautiful but lifeless. She found herself longing for the warm wood and lived in comfort of the mansion. Your children could visit us here, Adam suggested, watching her reaction carefully. The mansion is their home, Rachel replied automatically. Thomas built it for. Thomas is gone, my dear. Adam's voice was gentle but firm. And times change. That night, in their luxury suite, Rachel dreamed of the mansion. In the dream, it was crying, its windows like tearful eyes. She woke with a start, Adam's arm heavy across her waist. Just 2 more days, he murmured sleepily. Actually, Rachel said, surprising herself, I'd like to go home tomorrow. Adam's arm tightened slightly. As you wish. Back in Greenwich, Rachel found herself spending more time in Thomas's study, touching his old blueprints, remembering his dreams for the house. The emptiness that had once haunted her now felt like a sanctuary. My dear. Adam's voice interrupted her reverie. Shouldn't we move these old papers? I could use this room for my medical journals. Rachel closed the blueprint drawer firmly. No, she said. Some things need to stay as they are. She couldn't have known then how that small act of defiance would ripple forward. Rachel maintained her habit of walking home from the architectural firm, despite Adam's protests about it being beneath his wife's status. It was on one of these walks that she first saw them, 2 small figures performing on the sidewalk near the local market. Peter and Grace, 9-year-old twins, drew crowds with their makeshift circus act. Peter juggled whatever he could find. Apples, small balls, even pebbles, while Grace sang with a voice that seemed too big for her tiny frame. That was beautiful, Rachel said, dropping a 20 in their rusty tin can. Thank you, ma'am, Grace curtsied, her threadbare dress revealing 2 thin ankles. We're saving up for dinner. The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. Before she could respond, Peter grabbed his sister's hand and they disappeared into the crowd. You shouldn't encourage them, Adam said that evening when she mentioned the children. The police should handle street performers. They're just children, Adam. They're probably part of some organized gang. Greenwich doesn't need that element. But Rachel couldn't forget Grace's eyes, too old for her young face. She started carrying granola bars and fruit in her purse, looking for the twins on her walks home. My mom used to make sandwiches like this, Peter said one day, devouring the lunch she'd brought before she left. Who takes care of you now? Our big sister, Grace answered. But she's real busy with Grandma. She's sick, you see. Rachel found herself looking forward to these encounters, enjoying the children's simple gratitude and unaffected chatter. She learned that they lived in the working-class district across town, that Grace dreamed of being a singer, that Peter could do multiplication in his head faster than a calculator. Then came the night that changed everything. The doorbell rang past midnight. Steve's voice crackled over the intercom. Mrs. Wilson, it's the little girl from the street. She's hysterical. Rachel rushed downstairs to find Grace trembling on her doorstep, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. Peter, she sobbed. Peter's gone. The story spilled out between hiccups. They'd been hungry. The supermarket had just thrown out day-old bread. Peter had reached for more cookies, canned food. The security guard chased them. The truck came out of nowhere. I ran, Grace whispered. I just ran and ran until I found your house. Bring her inside, Rachel ordered, ignoring Steve's hesitation. Rachel. Adam appeared on the stairs, his face darkening at the sight of Grace. What is this? She needs help, Adam. Her brother just died. And that's our problem because his voice held a note she'd never heard before. cold, dismissive. Because she's a child who needs help, Rachel snapped. Maria, please prepare the guest room. Grace's small hand found Rachel's. You're just like my mom used to be, she whispered. That night, Rachel sat watching Grace sleep, the child's face finally peaceful. In the morning, she would drive her home, face whatever situation awaited them. But for now, she could offer this moment of safety. Adam's voice came from the doorway. We need to talk about boundaries, Rachel. This isn't a homeless shelter. Rachel looked at Grace's thin face, then at her husband's hardened expression. For the first time, she wondered if she truly knew the man she'd married. No, she said quietly. It's a home, and right now this child needs one. The morning light had barely touched the mansion's windows when Adam confronted Rachel in Thomas's study. His usual smooth charm had vanished, replaced by something harder, more calculating. This has to stop, he said, pacing the Persian carpet. First those students, now street urchins. This isn't what I signed up for. Rachel looked up from Thomas's old desk, something clicking into place. What exactly did you sign up for, Adam? A life of dignity, respectability. He stopped pacing, his hands gripping the back of a leather chair. Do you think my colleagues' wives take in vagrants? This house was built for family. Your family left. Adam's voice rose. They abandoned this beautiful house, this legacy. I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who deserves, he caught himself, but too late. Deserves what? Rachel's voice was deadly quiet. The house? Don't be dramatic, dear. I'm thinking of our future. We could sell this place, move somewhere more suitable? Sell it? The room seemed to spin. You married me for the house, didn't you? Rachel, be reasonable. All this time, she pressed her hand to her chest, feeling a familiar tightness. You've been waiting for me to sell it. You're getting yourself worked up. Adam stepped toward her, Dr. Mode engaging. Your heart? Don't. She backed away. Don't pretend you care now. The pain hit then, sharp and crushing. Rachel gasped, clutching the desk. Adam watched, his face unreadable. We should get you to the hospital, he said finally, but made no move to help. The world tilted. Through the haze of pain, Rachel heard Maria scream, felt Steve's strong arms lifting her. The mansion's walls blurred past as they rushed her to Adam's car. At the hospital, everything moved in slow motion. She caught fragments of conversation. Cardiac event? Needs immediate intervention. Dr. Lawrence, shouldn't we? Through half-closed eyes, she saw Adam in his surgical scrubs, hesitating. Let's wait, she heard him say. Sometimes nature knows best. The meaning of his words penetrated her fog. He was going to let her die. A commotion erupted outside her room. She's in here. A familiar young voice. Grace? Please, somebody help her. Who let this child in? Adam's angry voice. But Grace had already drawn every doctor on the floor. Rachel felt new hands examining her, heard urgent orders being given. Dr. Lawrence, step aside. We're taking her to surgery now. I'm her husband. Then you're too personally involved. Dr. Matthews will handle the procedure. As they wheeled her toward the OR, Rachel caught a glimpse of Grace's face, tears streaming down her cheeks. I came up the fire escape, the girl whispered. Peter showed me how. He said to make sure you're okay. Rachel tried to smile through the pain. An angel, she thought. Thomas sent me an angel. The last thing she saw before the anesthesia took hold was Adam's face, twisted with thwarted rage as Dr. Matthews prepared to save her life. 5 days after her surgery, Rachel woke to the sound of children's laughter echoing through the mansion's halls. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, until Jennifer's face appeared in her doorway. Mom! Her daughter rushed to her bedside. Thank God you're really okay. What are you? How did you know? Grace? Michael appeared behind his sister. That little girl had Maria call us. She said, your mama needs you now. Rachel's hand went to her chest, feeling the bandage beneath her nightgown. The stent procedure had saved her life, though not performed by the husband she trusted with her heart, in every sense. Where's Adam? She asked, though she already knew. Gone. Michael's voice hardened. He tried to claim he had medical power of attorney, but Grace's testimony about what she overheard. He paused. The hospital board is reviewing his position. I was so blind, Rachel whispered. No, Mom. Jennifer took her hand. You were living. There's a difference. They fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the sounds of life downstairs. Michael's children playing, his wife, Sarah, chatting with Maria in the kitchen. I've been thinking, Michael said carefully. The Belgrade office runs itself now. I could move back, take over Dad's firm. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Your father would have loved that. We can't all stay, Jennifer added. But I promise more visits, monthly at least. The children miss their grandmother. Later that afternoon, Grace appeared with a small bouquet of Thomas's roses. I hope it's okay, she said shyly. Maria helped me pick them. It's perfect. Rachel patted the bed beside her. Where's your sister? Downstairs, showing Sarah how to make Grandma's soup. She says you need good food to heal. Rachel smiled, remembering Thomas's words about keeping the house and the family. Family, she now understood, wasn't just about blood. Grace, she said slowly, how would your sister feel about moving closer? The carriage house needs renovation. But, the girl's eyes widened. Really? But what about Dr. Adam? Oh, I think he left something for me to sign. Rachel reached for an envelope on her nightstand. Inside was a divorce petition, already bearing Adam's signature. His parting gift. She signed it without hesitation, feeling lighter with each letter. That evening, the mansion hummed with dinner preparations. Michael's children chased each other through the halls while Jennifer's twins video called from Serbia. Their faces projected onto the dining room wall. Grace's sister arrived with their grandmother in a wheelchair, her eyes wet with gratitude. To new beginnings, Michael raised his glass. And old promises kept, Rachel added softly. Later, alone in Thomas's study, she touched his photograph. You knew, didn't you? She whispered, that the house would save us all in the end. Through the window, she watched Grace teaching Michael's youngest daughter to juggle in the garden. The mansion's shadows seemed to retreat, chased away by the sound of children's laughter, just as Thomas had always intended. But now,